Hello, Legend of the Samurai here with another high pin count Japanese dimple lock, this time the West 916. This is a 2-row, left and right, 12-pin lock, 6 on each side. And this is actually a fairly nicely made cylinder, so even with 12 pins, they're still pretty tricky to open. Alright, use a relatively snug tensioner, bottom of the keyway, and I'll be using just one flag because I can maneuver it both below and above the pins to get both sides. So this lock uses a mix of both standard and mushroom drivers, and the plug has some countermilling, specifically overmilling, although it's slightly restricted above it, so it almost acts like countermilling. So the standards bind first. That's 2 on the left, 2 on the right, and then here's the overmilling coming into play. 2 on the left again. There's 5 on the right. 2 is good. 1 is good. Alright, so that's our standards dealt with. Now we can go through and deal with the mushrooms. So going on the right. So 1, 3, 4, 5 we already set, and 6. And then to get the flag out, I actually have to release tension a little bit, but I don't drop anything. And then the left side, 1 and 2 are good. 3, 4. Looks like I got 5 as I was traversing through. And 6, and we're open. Alright, so the pin chambers are staggered here, so even if I spun this, it wouldn't relock. However, the drivers are small enough to fall into the keyway, so I'm not going to spin it, but lock it back up and take it apart. So apart from the necessity of having split ring pliers, these are relatively easy to gut. Have a cover on the back that holds the tailpiece in place. And that is actually keeping these sliding strips in place as well. Get the springs out first. I'll actually use that strip to get these out one at a time. We actually have a 7th chamber over here with a much larger spring, and that is for a ball bearing detent. Now, take out the plug. Alright, so in the plug we have 0 warding at all. It's just a rectangular slot all the way through. We have 6 pin chambers on each side, and then we have a divot where that 7th chamber is for the ball bearing. And then if we look closely, there's that first step of constriction, which prevents the key pins from falling down, and then there's this feature up at the top, and it bevels out to a wider diameter, and it actually comes back in on itself ever so slightly. So for a standard driver, it acts like overmilling, and for the mushroom drivers, it acts like the very tiniest bit of shallow countermilling, and that is present in all of the chambers. That's the plug. The housing is just drilled through fairly normally. You can see the chambers are all offset there. Nicely machined. Not a cast plug at all. And then the pins are actually very nicely made. They're very similar to what was in the Clavis T20. I'll show some of those. So here's one of the normal key pins. So they're ever so slightly tapered at the top, so that will give you some counter rotation if you keep pushing them, but otherwise they're very flat. And then we have some of these spooled key pins, which have a very slight taper here and then more taper in the spooled section, such that it will give you counter rotation in both places, and both levels can overset into that overmilling, or if you lift them much, much higher, you can get them above the shear line. And so I believe there is, yes, there's the second spooled key pin. So both of those are under the minimum lifts, and those each get standard drivers, and those are cupped to leave room for the springs. And then the normal key pins get these mushroom drivers, and those have a very sharp lip, also hollow for the springs, and a minimal bevel, so they act the way they are supposed to. And so we have standard drivers in 1, 2 on the left, and 2 and 5 on the right. And another thing they did is in one of the chambers, they use a different spring. And it's a stronger spring than the others, so that'll be for bump resistance. And it is only in the one chamber. All right, close on those one more time. So there we are. This is the West 916. They're fairly common in the used market and relatively inexpensive, especially if you're willing to get more than one of them. They tend to come in larger lots. But they are a lot of fun to pick, decently tricky for having only 12 pins because of those security drivers and the plug over and counter milling. So, if you're looking for a lower pin count but still high pin count Japanese dimple lock, I definitely recommend one of these. All right, thanks for watching and have a nice day.